Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is running the year-end close for Dynamics 365 Finance. My name is Heather, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you are agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within the coming weeks. If you have questions for the presenter or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout the event and in the live Q&A segment near the end. Thank you so much for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Kristi Slininger. Kristi, over to you.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you for everyone joining tonight for our last session around running the year-end close. As you can see here on our slide, this is a team effort of content that's been put together to try to really maximize the efficiency of your year-end close process for this year. So with that, let's take a look at our agenda. Our first topics, what we're going to do is focus just a little bit on an overview of the year-end close process itself. I'll talk a little bit about the new UI that was introduced and some of the differences around the processing, the parameters, the reversal process. From there, we'll jump into some performance improvements that you can choose to utilize within your year-end close process, and we'll talk about those in detail. And the very last thing we'll just briefly touch on is just some of the differences between the year-end close for those of you that use the core product versus the public sector. And we'll talk about what that means when we get there. So let's start out first, just talking again around the year-end close overview itself. As many of you may have already become aware, there is a new feature that we introduced called the General Ledger Year-end Close Enhancements. This feature is made mandatory in 10.029. So some of you may already be utilizing this. Some of you may still be on an older version, but maybe you've even turned the feature on already. Really what the feature does is it provides a separation between the setup of the year-end close template, but it also introduced a new page to actually maintain a history of the year-end close, a better audit trail of when the year-end close was run, if it was reversed, who did the reversal or the run, just to give a better history of what occurred. We also tried to address the reversal process, and we'll talk about that briefly. There was some confusion with the past design for how a year-end close was reversed. And the last thing that this feature did is we actually made the voucher number as a mandatory field when you actually run the year-end close process. So a little bit of a reminder, this is what the year-end close process used to look like before the feature was enabled. So as you can see at the top, of course, we have our button here where we can actually run the year-end close, but the rest of the window was the template where you defined the settings for how the year-end close should actually work in terms of the retained earnings account and which financial dimensions were relevant. But now, of course, this is what the new UI looks like if we're looking at just the template aspect. So as you can see, the button at the top of the window has been removed to actually run the year-end close process itself. But as you notice, the remaining settings are very much the same as what they were before. You still have the retained earnings and the financial dimensions for the balance sheet or the profit and loss. The one thing that notice we did remove is the little, I'm just going to switch back here. Notice we did have the date of the last year-end close. That's now been removed. And we've replaced it with the new window, of course, which gives us that more complete history or audit trail of the year-end close process itself. So as we can see here, the name of the templates are still shown on the left side of the window, and you can go ahead and choose which one of those templates you would actually start to run the year-end close process. And then when you actually do complete those year-end close processes or reversals, you'll see the history now down in the lower right grid of the window. So to start the year-end close process, this process looks very much the same to what you experienced before the feature. You would choose the button and you could choose an individual legal entity, or you could choose all of them by selecting the button at the top. That hasn't changed. And of course, the dialog itself is very similar to what we had before. You select your fiscal year for which you're running the year-end close. The voucher number, as I mentioned, is now mandatory. That does need to be filled in. But the one thing notice is we used to have a little option here called undo, and that was how you used to reverse the year-end close process. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but that, as you can see, has been removed. And instead, getting onto that same topic, what we've done in replace of it is actually put a specific button on the audit trail or the history page itself where you can choose to reverse whichever selected record you have down below. So here, for example, if I have selected my USMF year-end close for 2017 and I choose the reverse button, it would reverse just the year-end close for only that legal entity for that fiscal year. So you can see here, you can actually choose the specific combination of legal entity and fiscal year for which to reverse. And just as before, when you choose to reverse it, it'll still add it to a batch process for the reversal of the actual year-end close opening balances. Also, as a reminder, year-end close reversals is a little bit different than a lot of your typical reversals for other transactions. When you do a reversal for the year-end close, it's actually a delete. It completely deletes the opening balance transactions that were posted originally. So a little bit different than a reversal of a regular journal entry, for example. And one little tip too is if you use the reverse button, you might notice that the record just disappears from your grid. In order to see those records, you can choose this little option here to show the reversed audit trail. And the reason we did this is we wanted to clean up the UI basically so it didn't get so cluttered, because we know a lot of companies will actually run a year-end close and may reverse it and rerun it multiple times. So in order to keep this a little bit more clean, we do have the option where you can choose to show them if you so choose. And as you can see here, if you choose to show it, it'll show the fact that it has been reversed and then the date and the time for which that occurred. So let's talk a little bit about some questions that we often hear from our users specifically around this new feature. The first one we hear often is, I ran a year-end close for numerous years before the feature was enabled, and I've lost the history for those years. Why don't I see the previous year-end close history? So the answer to that, and I'm actually going to re-show you the original or previous year-end close window. The date of last year-end close was the only history we actually maintained about your year-end close within the year-end close process itself. So what this date does is it's literally a single field. So every time you run the year-end close, regardless for which fiscal year it was for, the date is updated for the last time you run the fiscal year-end close. We did not ever keep a history of individual legal entity plus fiscal year combination for when the year-end close is reversed or run, either one. So if we go back to the answer, the previous year-end close page, as we saw, only tracked the last date and time the year-end close is run for that specific legal entity. We don't or did not track the individual year-end close runs or reversals for the combination of the year and legal entity. Because we didn't have that detail, we really did not have a good way to populate that historical data in the new UI when you install or start using the new feature. Now, I want to also give a reminder that the vouchers from those previous year-end close processes are still maintained. They're still there by going to the voucher transactions window. You can put the voucher number in and actually view and see the original vouchers that were posted for those previous year-end closes. So that has not been removed. Also, I want to remind you that the batch history could still also be there. I know a lot of organizations will start to slowly remove or delete the batch history over time because it can build up to be a lot of information. But I just want to point out that those vouchers for those previous year-end closes are still there. The batch history may still be there also. but you don't still see or won't still see the history of those previous years that have been closed before the feature was enabled. Okay, the next question we hear often about the new feature is I ran a year-end close, and let's just say for 2021, it could be for another year also, before the feature was enabled. I now need to reverse the 2021 year-end close, but the undo option is gone. How do I reverse the year-end close? The answer to this is you actually just rerun the year-end close. And what will happen is one of two things. When you rerun the year-end close, we look at this GL parameter called delete existing year-end close entries when reclosing the year. And if that parameter is set to yes, what will happen is it will go ahead and it will fully delete the previous year-end close opening balances and rerun the year-end close. When that's complete, you will now see a record in the new UI that represents the year-end close now for the fiscal year 2021. Now, same thing, if that GL parameter for delete existing year-end close entries when reclosing the year, if that's set to no, what we do is we don't actually delete the previous opening balances. Those remain. And we only create new opening balance transactions for just the net new adjustments that were posted into General Ledger as of the last time you ran the year-end close. In this scenario, again, we will again create a record in the new window so you can see the year-end close for that fiscal year. Now that you have a record in there for the year 2021, if you really do need to just do a reversal and not a rerun, that record is now there and you can choose it and choose the reverse year-end close button at that point in time. So just kind of a little reminder here, that parameter I was talking about in GL, this is that parameter right here. And I just want to repeat a little bit again, which comes to our third question. We often will get questions around what is the difference between the reverse year-end close button and again, back to this delete setting. How are these two used in combination is often the question that we get. So just a reminder, the reverse year-end close button, what it does is it fully reverses the opening balances and closing. I should also add that if you have closing balances, it'll reverse the closing and the opening balances as if the year-end close had never been run. It is a true reversal or deletion of those opening and closing balances. The delete existing year-end close, like we just talked about, is only used if you actually are rerunning the year-end close. So you're not reversing the year-end close, you're actually running the year-end close for a second time or third time. So that's the only time that that GL parameter is used. The GL parameter, of course, is never used the first time you run the year-end close. We will always do a full opening balance set of transactions when the year-end close is run for the first time. This is only used when you rerun the year-end close the second or third or fourth time, however many times you run the process. So just a couple reminders for how those settings are different and how they're not basically used together. Okay, then the last little thing we want to talk about before we get to the performance side is just a reminder of what happens when you actually start the year-end close process. We will take a look at which legal entities and fiscal years were selected for the year-end close itself. And we will create batch jobs for each of those combinations and actually run the closing logic. So just kind of looking from a batch perspective, it's really a best practice to put a good description on that batch when you start the year-end close process, so that you can come into the batch job history and search on that description and easily find it. And then from there, of course, you can look at more of the batch job history to see the detail for what steps have been completed or are waiting to be processed. This is kind of where you can see that progress that's happening for that year-end close batch. Next section, let's talk about performance. How can you actually improve the performance of your year-end close? And we're going to focus on 4 things. The first is we'll just quickly chat about dimension sets. Secondly, we'll spend a little bit more time on the dimension options on the year-end close template itself. We'll talk about closing entries, and then the big new feature that I'm sure many of you maybe have heard about already is we will talk about the year-end close microservice. So the first tip that we have for year-end close performance improvements is around the financial dimension sets. The first tip is to really minimize the number of financial dimension sets that you have defined within the legal entity. You can either remove dimension sets that you're no longer using, or you can run the clear balance, this little button right here at the top, on those dimension sets that you really don't use very often, the ones that have minimal use. The important part about this is the last step in the year-end close is to actually rebuild the balances of these dimension sets after the opening balances are created. The less number of financial dimension sets you have, the more quickly that will complete. Or the ones that have cleared balances, again, will not be included in that process. So really, the more cleanup you can do on your financial dimension sets, the better the more faster that process will be for the rebuild of those dimension sets as the very last step of your year-end close. Our second tip is around the financial dimensions transfer. And this is one area I think some customers have a little confusion on exactly how this is used and what detail is kept or lost. So we did want to spend a little bit more time on this. The first step, or the second tip, I should start there first, is that to get better performance, the best way to do that is to set as many of your financial dimensions to close single as possible. So let's kind of talk about what these options do. So let's say with this legal entity, I only have my 3 dimensions: agreement, bank account, and business unit. So right now with the settings defined as how you see on the screen here, what will happen is when I run the year-end close for the companies selected, every single agreement value for that dimension will be maintained when we determine the gain or the loss and post that into retained earnings. So what that means is if you have 1,000 different agreement values and those are used on all of your transactions across the fiscal year, you will at a minimum have 1,000 retained earnings accounts that are created. That's if you close all. If you close single, what that means for that dimension is we don't care about the detail of that dimension as it pertains to retained earnings. So in this example, you can see bank account I have set to close single. Now notice my business unit is also set to close single, but notice they're set up slightly different. The close single for my bank account I left blank, but my business unit I put a value in. Both of these are valid setup. What the blank is used for is when the transfer happens from your gain and loss to retained earnings, you're basically telling the system, I don't care what the bank account dimension values are as it pertains to retained earnings. So basically, just blank them or set them all to blank. So there are really no dimension values. So again, back to our combination, if we think about 1,000 agreements, but my bank account, I don't care, I set it to blank, you're still only going to have 1,000 retained earnings accounts. Think about, though, now another example, which is what if I do keep the detail for the bank account and I've got 20 different bank accounts? You could potentially have up to 1,000 times 20 retained earnings accounts. Now, of course, that's assuming every possible combination of agreement and bank account was used at least one time during your fiscal year on your transactions that posted to general ledger. That may or may not be correct, but it kind of gives you an idea of how quickly the number of retained earnings accounts explodes as you choose to track the detail for more and more of your financial dimensions. So again, the close single, if I have this set to 004 for business unit rather than leaving it blank, it still gives you the same benefit, which is saying I don't really care about the detail behind my business unit, But rather than having a blank dimension, have it all accumulated or summarized into 004 as my business unit dimension value. So the more financial dimensions you can define as close single, the better your performance will be for the year-end close, because we have less combinations to evaluate and to summarize and to create closing and opening balances for. So I'm going to give just a really quick example, just a screenshot here. This is just using our demo data. What I did is in my year-end close template for my P&L accounts, I did kind of something similar to what we discussed, which is I set my cost center to close all, my department to close all. And you can see here when I run my year-end close, what happened is every combination of cost center and department were actually included as a separate balance in retained earnings when it posted my opening transaction, my opening balances. Now, if I change that setup slightly and I say cost center, I want to close all because I do care about the values for cost center, but my department, maybe I don't. So I'm going to choose close single and leave it blank. So now you can see what happens is we go from a very large quantity of retained earnings down to just 3, because we only have 3 business units, blank 001 and 002, that were actually posted on transactions in the year for which I just ran the year-end close. Now, obviously, this is a very small subset of dimensions and a very small subset of values. If you think about the dimensions that you have in your organization, though, you can imagine how the number of retained earnings can really explode your chart of accounts if you choose to do close all on a lot of those dimensions. So really the point with this tip is really evaluate your financial dimensions and which ones you absolutely really need to see a retained earnings balance for. For example, we do have some customers that will track dimensions like customer or vendor. So you have to ask the question, do I really need to see retained earnings at the vendor level? If the answer to that is no, we highly recommend doing close single and either leave it blank or put in a specific value. With a vendor dimension, probably better to leave it blank. Okay. One question we get from customers after that discussion around using close single as much as possible, often we get customers asking, when I run the year-end close, I always choose close all so that my detailed transactions aren't lost. How can I keep the detail if I use close single? So I want to make it clear again, you never lose the detail of your P&L accounts in the year that you're running the fiscal year close for. So if I'm running my year-end close, if we go back to this screenshot here, if I ran this for the year 2020, or let's say 2022 into 2023, I can still go back to my P&L in 2022 and see my gain or my loss by a vendor, if that's a dimension, or by a certain customer, if that's a dimension, or a product or a project. You can still always get to the detailed gains and losses in the fiscal year that you just closed by looking at your typical financial statements. The only thing you're doing is you're losing that detail when we summarize it, when we create the retained earnings account balances for the opening balances. So you really are not losing the detail. It's still there on your P&L for the year you closed. You're simply summarizing it for retained earnings. So hopefully that does help clarify a little bit that you still can get the detail that you really need to for your financial statements. Okay, our third tip is around the setting for creating closing entries. So maybe some of you are familiar with this setting, maybe others have never used it. But there is a setting in GeoParameters called Create Closing Transactions During Transfer. If this is set to no, what the system will do during the year-end close is it will only create opening balance transactions for the next fiscal year. If this is set to yes, it'll create closing transactions for the year you're running the year-end close for, plus opening balances in the new fiscal year. If you create closing transactions, we're processing more transactions, we're posting more transactions, your year-end close will be slower. If you absolutely have to have closing transactions, there are some countries that may require it. Then, of course, set it based on what your legal requirements are. If you don't, though, the tip would be to set this to no so that you have no closing entries and you're only creating opening entries. Okay, our last performance tip is our bigger one here. We have a new feature that we just introduced. It is called Optimize Year-End Close. So our fourth tip for all of you is to start utilizing this feature. As you'll learn a little bit later, I'll have some screenshots. This was introduced in 10.030, but we actually did, or sorry, 10.031, but we actually did backport it for customers still on build 29 or build 30. So even if you are using a slightly older build, which 30 is actually the current GA build, you can go back even for 29 and use this new feature. So I first wanted to talk about a little bit the goals of the feature. Our 4 goals that we had, and of course there were some others, but these were our big ones, is we wanted to improve the performance of the year-end close process itself. We want it to be faster. Number 2, we want to free up resources within Dynamics Finance and Operations for when you're actually running the year-end close. So what this means is we don't want the system to be so bogged down with the year-end close process that other regular processes or transactions are impacted. That's not what we want. Third thing is we really wanted better visibility into the progress of the year-end close itself. And the fourth is we actually added a new feature where you can define the financial dimension detail at the balance sheet account level also. So we talked a little bit earlier about the P&L dimension settings for how they impact retained earnings. What we did is we actually brought that same level of detail down to the dimension level also for balance sheet accounts. So we'll talk about that quite a bit too. So first thing we need to talk about is how do I actually use this new feature? The first thing you need to do, there's 2 steps, is go into LCS and you need to first install this service within LCS, and it's called Optimize Year-End Close, as you can see here on the screen. Once that new service is installed, the second step is you simply have to go to Feature Management and enable the feature called, again, Optimize Year-End Close. So once you have the service installed in LCS and the feature enabled, you're ready to go. So let's talk about a little bit about, before I do a demo of this, kind of what is happening under the covers. So today, if you don't have the feature turned on, we kind of talked about this a little bit a few slides back, where when you start the process, we will take the legal entity and fiscal year, and we will start the process. But now we have a check that says, is the service installed and the feature enabled? If it's not, we'll still continue to go down the old path. We'll continue to create the batch jobs. This will all process within X++, just as it did in the past. But we've added a new path, of course, to this, where if this answer to these questions is yes, where the new service is installed and the feature is enabled, we still create the batch jobs within X++. You still see those within finance. But a lot of the heavy lifting or the heavy processing of the year-end close itself is now done as a on a microservice rather than within X++. So what that means is you actually have the best of both worlds, which is you have better performance, but it doesn't impact your users that are still currently using the finance product. They can still post without interference, and there really isn't that heavy processing that's happening on the batch server within X++ for you. So with that said, we are going to give you a demo. I'm going to jump over to my machine and get back logged in here. So the biggest thing I want to point out is that one of the goals with this feature, again, was that you really shouldn't see a difference for the year-end close, whether you're using X++ or the new microservice. So once the LCS feature is installed, once you have the feature enabled, you start the process just as you did before. You go to General Ledger, you go to your period close, you choose year-end close. None of this has changed. You might notice a few minor changes here. Specifically, the status. If you remember, one of our goals was to provide better insight into the process or the status of the year-end close itself. So in order to accomplish that, we've added these two new options here where you can see the results of the year-end close and the current status of where the process is at. And I'll actually show you this as it dynamically changes when we start the process. Okay, so what I'm going to do is let's start the process. I'll choose to close for DEMF. Nothing here has changed. You select your fiscal year. I'm going to put in my voucher number and I'm going to kick it off. So just as we showed in the process flow, we still create a batch for the year-end close process, but I'm going to refresh and notice I now actually have a record here where in the past, before the microservice, this actually didn't show until the year-end close was complete. Notice here as I keep refreshing, my status is changing. It's updating as it's going through each step of the process. I can also click on view results, and you can see we're starting to see the status updates as it's occurring. So if I keep hitting the refresh, notice it's now queued. If I refresh again, now we see it's actually posting. As I keep refreshing, or if I be patient and wait, eventually the refresh will actually show, as you can see, a completed status. If there is a failure, it'll actually show you that also with the status that we see there. So let's just take a look at the results and just kind of see where we're at. So you can see here now, it shows you each step it's going through. It's created the job, it's preparing it, removes any year-end close transactions that may have been there before if I'm rerunning the year-end close. So you can see each step as it's going through here. And as we keep updating, there we have our updated status that we can see here. To see the actual details, if there was a failure, you still will need to go back to the batch job history in order to see the failures, if there were any issues. But at least this will tell you kind of where you're at in the steps that the year-end close goes through. Sometimes customers are kind of curious and they're watching the batch. This makes it a little bit more user-friendly. Now, the other change I wanted to talk about is back on the template itself. We talked about the fact that we enhanced the balance sheet settings. So if we expand this, you can see here now, previously we only had this option at the top where it was a complete keep or don't keep the financial dimension detail for balance sheet accounts. That has changed. So now you can actually say yes for the dimensions of the balance sheet, but you now have the same control over the level of detail for the balance sheet accounts, just like you do for the P&L accounts down below them. So you can see here for department, I ran close single. That's kind of the example I gave earlier because I also have it set up that way under my profit and loss account types. So again, the microservice, the key thing that you're seeing here, you really see no difference from an end user perspective. And that's really also one of our goals, is that you shouldn't have to know that the microservice is even running the year-end close. It just silently is doing the work for you behind the scenes. Okay, let's go back and just quickly talk. We already looked at the statuses. We talked a little bit about the dimensions. I do want to go into a little bit more detail on this though before we keep going. I want to make sure that everyone understands how the dimension settings work for the balance sheet accounts. And I'll give an example here on the next slide. But the key thing to remember is that the dimension settings for the balance sheet accounts are only used for operational transactions, not opening balance transactions. So you might be wondering, well, what does that mean? Okay, so let's look at an example here. What I have on the screen is I have a trial balance from 2016 and on the right side from 2017. The accounts that you're seeing are the same. So I didn't repeat the accounts again on the right side of the window. But what I want to point out here is on my year-end close template for my balance sheet accounts, my cost center, I have it set to close all, but my department, I have it set to close single, and I left it blank. Okay, so if we take a look, when I ran the year-end close, what happens for this first account in 2016? You can see what happened is it took the closing balance and it just brought it forward as an opening balance. Because we basically said, I care about the cost center, my cost center. Oh, sorry, I actually don't even have my cost center on here. Actually, sorry, this should have been business unit, not cost center. Sorry, there's a little typo there. So this is business unit. So my business unit was blank. So it maintained that blank, but department I don't care about. It said keep it as blank. So that's why we kept the detail or the ending balance of 450,000 credit and brought that forward as opening balance. Now, if we look at the next set of transactions, though, let's jump down to lines 3 and beyond. So notice here for my business unit, again, these are all business unit 001, but I have individual department values here. But notice I've said up above in my year-end close template, I don't care about the department values. I want to summarize those to blank. So notice what's happening is my opening balances for those accounts are what's brought over as my exact opening balances into my next fiscal year. And the reason for that is because the department setting of close single, blanking it out, is only used for the net new operational transactions that were posted into the year 2016. So these transactions in green, if we add up these credits, what this is going to do is instead it adds these and adds it to my main account 110130, same business unit, but a blank department. So my opening balance in 2017 is actually my closing balance for that account, plus or minus any debits or credits in all the other balances that happened for all my other departments. So it's taking up the approximately $48 million and subtracting the credits to get an opening balance of the $6.6 million. So it's important to understand the balance sheet settings when we say to keep or not keep those dimensions are only used on the operational or new transactions posted, moving them forward as the opening balance. We don't summarize the existing transactions that were created with opening balances from prior year-end closes. We do get questions on that, so we wanted to make sure that we covered that in the session. Okay, just a little bit of wrap up for documentation. The year-end close, optimize year-end close feature that we just talked about. We do have this documented, of course, in the What's New documentation for 10031. There is a link here, and this will be made available to you within a week or so, a link to the actual documentation also for the feature. So please take a look at that. As I mentioned before, even though this officially went out for 10031, we did choose to backport it to 30 and 29 so that customers could take advantage of the progress or the optimization feature. And then, of course, there is a little bit of information here on services within LCS. So if you do have questions around how to install those services and anything about the management of the data, please take a look at this documentation for that. Our last quick topic, and then we are ready for Q&A, is just a quick update on the core year-end close versus the public sector. Sometimes we get questions from customers are like, how do I know if I'm using the core year-end close or the public sector version? That's actually determined by this one little setting in your GL parameters. So if you're on the ledger tab, if you go to your fiscal year close tab here, if you have your option to use fund dimension for year-end transactions, if that's set to yes, you are using the public sector version of the year-end close, and it is different than the core year-end close process. It doesn't actually use the template that we looked at all. You actually need to define posting definitions for how the opening or closing balance transactions are created, such as what retained earnings accounts will be used. It also heavily, of course, uses funds, because funds is a very important concept within the public sector. One other thing we did want to call out, though, is currently the public sector year-end close still only runs within X++. It does not yet use the microservice that we just talked about. So even if you did want to use the microservice, you first need to just double check to make sure you're not using public sector year-end close. If you are, that won't be available for you, at least yet. Okay, with that, we are to the Q&A section. It looks like we have a good 20 minutes left. And with that, I think Annette or Eric, I think, are looking at questions. We can review what we have and answer anything else.
Yes, we do have a handful of questions, Kristi. The first one is the close all and close single new. I just checked last year's opening transactions for retained earnings and we have no dimensions.
Okay, so
And
good question.
Yep,
please go ahead. If someone answered already? Or should I answer?
Yep,
Okay,
we did. You can validate and verify our answer. No, the close all and close single options for retained earnings is not a new feature. It existed in prior versions. And Eric noted that we do have the new options that you just described, though, for the balance sheet accounts with the optimized microservice.
Correct.
And,
but it's not a new feature. It's been there all the way back to even AX 2012 days.
But if you had it right, you could have had it set to what would it be? Close single
and
left
it
with a blank, and then you would lose them.
Yep, correct.
Yes.
Or they would be stripped off on the.
Yep, they would be removed.
Yes.
And again, it really comes down to the business requirements of your organization. For some, that's perfectly fine. They really don't necessarily need to see the retained earnings at that level. It's really up to you and your organization.
And for the question, right, if it was incorrectly, the setting was incorrectly set when they ran it, assuming the years they're still open, they may be able to rerun it to pick that up.
Absolutely. Yep, you could reverse your year-end close or just rerun your year-end close after you change your setup on your template. Correct.
Great. Okay, next question. In what way the closing transactions parameter, in what way the closing transactions are different from the clearing of the P&L accounts into retained earnings? So they're talking about the option in general ledger parameters. And what that will do is it will create the closing transactions in the year that's being closed. So it'll bring all of your balances down to zero in the year you're closing, and it will still create your opening transactions just as it normally would. And I would say in contrast, that close all, close single, that's really applying to the opening balances that are being brought forward for the retained earnings account. So that's the difference. So Kristi, I don't know if you have additional comments there that you want to
Nope, that's
say.
a very good call out. Yes, the dimension settings are only used for the opening balance, never for the closing balance transactions if you choose to create them. Yep.
Okay, and the next question was about the service. Is there a cost for the service? And there is no additional cost for the new microservice. Yep. And then one just came in. We haven't answered it yet. Are there additional details walk through on setting up the microservices in LCS, please?
I'm not sure. Yeah, Eric,
yeah,
maybe
I know.
Yep.
So it is, it's there. All you have to do is like click the add button and then choose it. There's no additional configuration. Most of when you have additional configuration, it's probably to link it to something in the customer's subscription. Since this is all in the Microsoft subscription, there's no extra configuration. All you have to do is add the microservice and then go in and enable the feature, and you're ready to roll.
Awesome, thank you.
And at this point, we don't have any more questions that I am seeing. So we can pause here. Go ahead and type if you have additional questions.
I'm curious, even if there aren't any questions, if anyone is planning to enable the microservice. It would be interesting just to see if there's interest from the group.
And we are not seeing any new questions coming in yet.
All right. I know that there's a little lag between the time of the questions and us receiving them, so we're not in any hurry. We'll just patiently wait and just see if anything gets added for us.
There are still no new questions.
All right.
Oh, we have one coming in.
All right. Great.
Question. Our year end isn't until June, so I will enable and test the microservice first. Very good.
Awesome.
Thank you for that comment.
Yes. Excited for you to try it.
And then another question just came in. Are there any planned enhancements in this area?
I'm not sure if the question is specific to microservices or just year-end close across the board. But we do have, yes, we do have more enhancements planned. With the year-end close process itself, there's multiple steps, kind of as we discussed when I was showing the statuses. Not all of those steps are actually run in the microservice. Some are still run within X++. So we will try to continue to move more of those steps to the microservice potentially, which will even increase your performance even more. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. Also, the public sector year-end close that we talked about at the end. That's another feature we definitely are going to be working on, is moving also the public sector year-end close to use a microservice so that they will also have a faster year-end close. And there's more. Those are just the two at the top of my head that I can think of right now, but we absolutely are really looking to get to more of a continuous close process at the end of any period, whether it's a month or a year end. So we're definitely looking at doing more automation. If anyone wasn't able to attend the first session preparing for the year-end close, we did talk about some functionality there with ledger settlement automation. That was a new feature that's just coming out in 10.031. So I would highly recommend you take a listen to that session recording if you haven't already.
Yeah, the recording for that should be up soon.
Yep. Since it was about a week ago. So we're getting close to getting that out.
And I don't see any other questions in the queue yet.
Great. And actually, one thing we do like to ask of customers is, what would you like to see us also enhance as we're looking forward to new functionality and new features? Is there anything more around the year-end close itself, or just any processes that you have at the end of a period, such as consolidations or foreign currency revaluation? We're always looking for feedback in those areas too. Oh, maybe wait another minute or two. Well, I think if we're not getting any more questions, we will wrap it up. And with that, I'm going to actually hand it back to Heather.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristi. I have posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel, and we would love your feedback on today's session and to hear what you'd like to see in future events. Thank you so much for your participation today. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within the coming weeks. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, Kristi, and our audience for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are.